Imagine a time when Africa's borders weren't drawn by foreign powers. A time when the continent was united, its people connected by shared histories, cultures, and kingdoms. But what if I told you that the Africa we know today isn't the Africa of its past? In fact, the map you're familiar with was only created a little over a century ago, shaped by European hands during the scramble for Africa. But what did the original map of Africa look like, and how did these artificial borders divide nations, cultures, and even families? Stay with us as we unravel the true and original map of Africa before the colonial borders changed everything. Before the arrival of colonial powers, Africa wasn't a continent divided by arbitrary lines. It was a rich tapestry of interconnected peoples, thriving kingdoms, and sophisticated civilizations. These empires and kingdoms didn't just exist in isolation. They often interacted through trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. For instance, the Kingdom of Aksum, located in what is now Ethiopia, was one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in ancient Africa. Aksum was not just a political power but a center of commerce and culture, dominating trade routes across Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and even the Indian Ocean. Its people were pioneers in many fields, from architecture to mathematics, and they were among the first to adopt Christianity as a state religion in the 4th century, centuries before it spread to much of Europe. In West Africa, the Mali Empire ruled over vast regions from the 13th to 16th centuries, dominating trade routes that spanned across the Sahara Desert. Mali's wealth was legendary. Its ruler, Mansa Musa, was one of the richest men in history. In 1324, he embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and his lavish spending along the way led to the infamous inflation of gold prices. His empire was not only rich in resources but also in knowledge, fostering centers of learning like the legendary Timbuktu, home to scholars and thinkers who attracted attention from across the world. Further south, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, famous for the Great Zimbabwe ruins, was another example of African unity and power. The Great Zimbabwe Kingdom thrived from the 11th to the 15th century and was a major trading hub, particularly in gold and ivory. Its impressive stone architecture, including the Great Enclosure, stands as a testament to the advanced engineering and social organization of its people. Africa's political structure was not simply a collection of isolated kingdoms and empires. The continent's diverse peoples were bound together by shared political and cultural frameworks. There were many examples of cooperative governance, where kingdoms formed alliances based on mutual interests. One notable example is the Oyo Empire, in what is now southwestern Nigeria. The Oyo Empire was one of the most powerful in West Africa, and it had a sophisticated political system based on checks and balances. The Alafin, the king of Oyo, ruled with the help of the Oyo Messi, a council of wise men and military leaders. This system of governance ensured that power was shared and distributed, preventing any one individual or group from having absolute control. In southern Africa, the Zulu kingdom under Shaka Zulu in the early 19th century was a model of unity. Shaka unified disparate Zulu clans through military conquests, but he also created a powerful and cohesive nation through social reforms and the creation of a strong military structure. His innovations in warfare, such as the famous horns of the Buffalo Formation, changed the course of African military history. But then came the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885.
The west coast of Africa, looking today much as it did 100 years ago. At that time, the old evils of the slave trade had become a distant, though disgraceful, memory. But there now opened a new chapter of confrontation along these tropical shores. In past years, Europeans had come here for profitable business. Now they wanted more, much more. Old trading posts like this one had long been the scene of a partnership between maritime traders from Europe and local Africans. By the 1880s, That old partnership was being swept away in a dramatic change, the outcome of a new European drive for overseas empire. Industrialized countries led by France and Britain had begun to invade the black continent, each hoping for new sources of raw materials for its factories, new markets for its manufactures, and new positions of advantage against its rivals. This was called the Scramble for Africa. By 1914, only two countries remained outside European possession, Liberia in the west and Ethiopia in the east. Britain had seized the lion's share of control. Egypt and the Sudan in the north, the immense wealth of South Africa, valuable colonies like Rhodesia and Kenya, and richly populated territories such as Nigeria and the Gold Coast. France had invaded Algeria in the 1830s. Now, after new wars of conquest, she added more colonies to her empire south of the Sahara, including the island of Madagascar. Little Portugal carved out two vast colonies, Angola and Mozambique, while Imperial Germany took the Cameroons and southwest Africa, and on the east coast, Tanganyika. The vast Congo basin fell to King Leopold of the Belgians. Italy and Spain completed the enclosure. The fate of the continent was utterly changed.
European colonial powers gathered in Berlin to divide Africa among themselves, without consulting a single African leader. This is where the real map of Africa, the one that most people are familiar with today, was drawn. These artificial borders, based on European interests and not African realities, cut through established trade routes, cultural territories, and ethnic groups. They disregarded the natural unity that had existed for centuries and replaced it with straight lines and geometric shapes, many of which still exist as national borders today. For instance, the House of Fulani people, an ethnic group that straddles the borders of both Nigeria and Niger. Under colonial rule, these people were separated by the border drawn by the British, dividing a unified community. In other parts of Africa, entire tribes or ethnic groups were split in half, causing tensions that persist in post-colonial times. These colonial borders didn't just appear on maps. They became a reality for millions of Africans. The divisions created by colonial powers didn't respect Africa's complex social fabric. Instead, they imposed foreign identities on people who had lived for centuries with their own systems of governance, kinship, and relationships. This is why we see the legacy of these borders in many of Africa's modern struggles. The Rwandan genocide in 1994, for example, was partly a result of colonial tactics that favored one group over another, creating long-lasting ethnic divisions. Similarly, in the Sudan and South Sudan conflict, the borders drawn by the British left many ethnic groups in conflict, leading to decades of violence. Take Nigeria as another example.
The British went to Nigeria in 1861 to put down traffic in slaves. Today, Nigeria is Britain's biggest protectorate, larger than France and Italy combined. It has a greater population than those of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand put together. Its people speak many different languages with hundreds of dialects, belong to different races, practice different religions.
The British created Nigeria by merging over 250 ethnic groups, some of which had very different cultures, languages, and histories. This mix led to conflicts, including the devastating Nigerian Civil War, 1967 to 1970, a bloody conflict fueled by ethnic tensions exacerbated by colonial rule. Despite the challenges posed by these artificial borders, Africa is taking strides toward unity. In 2001, the African Union (AU) was established to promote peace, unity, and development across the continent. The AU works toward resolving conflicts, encouraging economic cooperation, and creating a common African identity that transcends the colonial boundaries. Programs like the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, which came into effect in 2021, aimed to break down economic barriers between African nations, allowing for free trade and economic growth across the continent. Today, Africa stands at a crossroads. The colonial legacy of artificial borders still influences its politics, economics, and social structure, but Africa's future is bright. With a growing population, rapidly expanding economies, and increasing global influence, the continent is poised for a new era. As Africans, we must embrace our shared history and heritage, recognizing that despite the divisions created by colonialism, we are united in our pursuit of a prosperous, peaceful, and united continent. Though the colonial powers may have drawn lines to divide us, the true map of Africa is one of unity in our shared heritage, in our cultures, and in our future. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Africa's past and present. If you want to learn more about Africa's rich history and the challenges we face today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Together, we'll continue to explore the real Africa and all its untold stories.